You know what he said to me? He said, "I'm tired of you people complaining. Every time I turn on the news or watch television, you people are complaining. If you can't appreciate what this fine country has done for you people, maybe you ought to just go back to where you came from." Those were the words of a participant in a workshop I did a few years ago. It was shocking, but I wasn't surprised. I've learned a lot of things in over 30 years of facilitating diversity and inclusion workshops. Some things are scary, some things are encouraging. But what's important is that we facilitate a discussion. And that's what we've been trying to do. Hi, I'm Keith Lee. I'm your host for It's About Time. We're coming to you this week from South Texas, the birthplace of my ancestors. And I'm visiting some relatives out here, and I thought it's a good time. It's a good time to talk to you about race relations and my experience, especially with regards to diversity workshops. Hey, thanks for joining us. Please be sure to subscribe to this channel. It's very important. We'd love to hear your feedback. In fact, do me a favor. If you've had an experience where someone has said something that was insulting, even if they didn't mean it, share it with me. Write it in the comments section. Let's talk about it. Thanks for being here. Hang on, we'll be right back. Yeah, so that's what he told me in the workshop. Basically, if I didn't like it, get out. And he wasn't specifically talking to me. He was talking to people who look like me and others. You know, our workshops that we've done were all meant to facilitate a discussion without fear and making people feel comfortable to be honest. So I appreciated his honesty. Our workshops are fun, they're educational. More importantly, they're interactive. And so once we can learn how to talk to each other and honestly speak to each other, more times than not, we find that we have more things in common than we have in difference. And so creating this safe space to talk about our differences, not just race, but the other dimensions of diversity. When we find that safe space, we discover things about each other. And unless we decide to, we find out that we have more tools of unity than instruments of separation. But it takes a little bit of maturity, it takes some willingness, and more importantly, it takes the desire to dissolve any fear or prejudgment about a person who may be different, regardless of what that difference is. Now, this is especially difficult in the current times we live in terms of different people trying to separate us as a people, as a nation, as a community, state by state, city by city, person by person. This is very important that we bound upon our similarities, not our differences. And in my experience in doing these diversity workshops, I have found some key factors that have come to the top in terms of people talking to each other. I mentioned one, fear. You know, F-E-A-R, fear. And that's an acronym, in my opinion, for a couple of things. That acronym can stand for false evidence appearing real. You know, if we have a prejudgment in our mind, an idea about a person or what we've heard or what we've seen about a person of difference, it exists in our mind. So when we interact with them based upon false evidence. But because our bias has been impacted by what we've brought in through another source, it appears real. And so our interaction, our words, our actions, our attitudes is all based upon a falsehood. And so once we learn how to separate our own fears from difference, we now can have a conversation. Now, in this conversation, I think it's very important that we really recognize the difference between fact and opinion, right? Fact and opinion. So often we have this discussion and we may agree or disagree, but a lot of it's based upon our opinion. When we stop and really bring out what the facts are about this issue, facts, then we can have a real constructive conversation about anything. About crucial situations, we can have a moral conversation based upon facts, as long as we recognize the difference between fact and opinion. Very important. The other thing that I've noticed is a lot of people, they don't want to get involved in diversity workshops because they feel like they're going to be blamed for all the ills of the sins of the world, right? They don't want to go in there and get blamed. They feel like people are looking at them and making them responsible and accountable for all the racial discord or the about the lack of gender sensitivity. No, it's not like that. It's not about blame. It's not about guilt. It's not about putting anybody on trial. It's about seeking common ground. It's not about the past. It's about how we do need to recognize the past, but with the purpose of not repeating it. It's not about blame, and it's not about guilt. I'll share with you a story, an experience, I should say, I had while living in Nevada, northern Nevada. On this particular workshop, the theme and the focus was on racial profiling, right? And it was for, I think it was about between 75 and 100 students. I decided to take 3 of my students who were working for me at the time to show them how a workshop is done and how we facilitate a workshop. Now, these 3 students were white, okay? So the topic is racial profiling. And as we were leaving the workshop, these students were peppering me with questions about, does that really happen? How often does it happen? Is there any fault of the person who's being so-called profiled? And I'm explaining it to them. Again, I was talking about fear and stereotyping and that type of thing. As we entered the car on our way to go back to our office, which was about 45, 50 minutes away, I did notice a police car across the street. That's just a habit, I guess, things that you notice when you realize that, I guess, you're outnumbered in your environment. You take note of things, and I saw him. So as we were driving away, I wasn't surprised when he pulled me over. Now remember, I got 3 white students in the car. I'm in a suit and tie. The guy pulls me over. Of course, he runs my tags. I didn't do anything wrong. I pulled away and I was driving down the street less than a minute. He came up to the car and the first thing he said, he looked at the 3 students, he said, "Are you people okay? Are you sure?" That was his first statement. And then, of course, he asked me what I was doing. He asked me, driver's license, insurance, the whole thing. So initially, I didn't answer his question. I just let him run my tags, run my license, no warrants, nothing like that. And so finally, when he came back and he asked me again, he said, "So what are you doing here?" I said, "Sir, I just ran a workshop on racial profiling, and you just made my point. Thank you." And we drove away. The students, of course, were chatty all the way back to the office. They couldn't believe it. They were upset. They were mad. But they got a firsthand view of what it's like. The difference is that was one experience that they probably will never experience again. I will experience numerous times after that. And probably it might happen again tomorrow. The sad part is I expect it. I had another interesting experience, actually one of many. But I was doing a workshop in, I think it was in Philadelphia. This had to have been over 10 years ago. But I walked in, there was a group of educators, professors, people with PhDs. And I asked, before I started the workshop, I asked the group, who was majority white teachers, supposedly progressive in thought. I asked them a simple question. I said, what do you see standing before you? And they hesitated for a while, and they didn't say anything. I asked the question again, what do you see standing before you right now? So I guess one gentleman decided to share with me what he saw. He said, I see a man. I see a man in a suit. I see an articulate man. I see an intelligent man. I see a man who's just standing there. I just see a man. I said, is that all you see? And he said, yeah, that's all I see. And I waited for a while, and he said, you see, I don't see color. So I had to stop him. I said, well, I know you didn't mean it, but actually that's what's called a microaggression, an insult without meaning to insult someone. I said, so let's be honest. You don't just see a man. You see a black man. And you see, if you don't recognize me in my entirety, in everything that I am, it's insulting, because that suggests to me that my blackness has something wrong with it in your eyes. And I asked him, you see how that might be insulting? I know you didn't mean to, but we got to stop avoiding these types of things. I'm proud to be black, but my pride has nothing to do with your racial background. Just because I'm proud of who I am, that doesn't mean I think any less of you. I'm actually proud of you too. So you see, we both can celebrate, acknowledge, and honor each other in our differences, but you can't ignore it. That's insulting. So I had a chance to educate him. I don't know how he accepted it, but I think after a couple of days, I think the message came through. You know, I'm often asked about athletes and their activism, excuse me, and their stance against social injustice. I've probably been asked my opinion over 100 times, and of course I'm going to go deeper into this in another video. That's why you got to subscribe to this channel. But what I want to say now is, I think the general public has to remember, before that athlete is an athlete, before he's in a position to entertain you for your pleasure and enjoyment, before you even heard of him, before you even saw his number, before you read his statistics, before all of that, he was a man or a woman. He was a human being. I had a coach one time that told me, don't ever forget, there's a human in that helmet. Obviously, he was one of my football coaches. And so before he's there to entertain you, he's a citizen of this country. In some cases, he's a citizen of color. In most cases, he's experienced some type of social injustice. And the fact of the matter is when he hangs up those cleats, or he hangs up the tennis racket, or he hangs up the basketball shoes, or whatever it might be, he's still going to be a citizen of this country. Long after his autograph that you got from him fades away, he's still going to be a citizen of this country and a forgotten athlete. He has to live with that. Or she has to live with that. He or she probably will have children by then. And just like anyone else, as any responsible parent, we're concerned about our children's future. So, is it the right place and time? Some would argue yes, some would argue no. They say, well, Keith, would you have kneeled when you played football? You know, I was a journeyman player. I was a backup player. I could play a lot of different positions. I wasn't a starter. One year I was for half a season. But generally speaking, I was a free agent. So it would have been a lot of pressure on me to kneel and jeopardize my career over a social issue position. It would have been risky. It would have been a situation where I would have had to compromise my dream that I worked so hard to reach. But I would have kneeled. You see, because the game of life is much, much bigger than the game of football. Who knows what would have happened? But the point being is that we do have to bring attention to these social injustices. And if the most powerful man in the world can take a position on a social justice issue, you can't then try to make a 23-year-old young man the only role model, if you will, for social injustice. I think that's asking a little too much. Something to think about. So look, I hope you join me in trying to make people understand that regardless of our differences, regardless of our location, our language, our nation of birth, regardless of what makes us different, our job is to seek commonality. Our job is to help us all be unified. And just like at the top of this show when the guy said, basically love it or leave it, this is the greatest country on earth. There's no doubt about it. The United States is the greatest. No disrespect to the other nations. But what makes us great is our willingness to make it better for everyone. That's the nucleus of our greatness. That fact. When we start to settle and start to go back into our different categories of power and privilege and our own categories of selfishness, sort of a social narcissism, that's when we start to lose it. We can't afford to do that. I want to share with you another quote from Martin Luther King. He said, "Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals." I hope you keep that in mind. Hey, thanks for joining us. I want to quickly also answer a quick question. I got a comment and an email last week from Mandy. And Mandy asked me, as we were talking about coaches and their influence, she asked me who my favorite coach was. Well, I had a number of favorite coaches throughout my journey, Mandy. My first and most influential coach, therefore probably my best coach, was also my life coach. It was my father and also my mother. Both. My dad was my first baseball coach, and I learned how to compete. I learned how not to give up. My mom taught me how to love a game and taught me how to embrace not just the victories, but embrace the defeats as learning lessons. And I carry that with me throughout. Of course, in high school, I was coached by a gentleman named Ralph Vidal, who to this day still has great influence on me and my approach to life. He also was one of our coaches in junior college. In college, my most influential coach was a gentleman named Coach Charlie Army. who believed in me from the day we met. And to this day, he still serves as a great friend and mentor for me. Believe it or not, in the pros, I had a number of different coaches, but the one who probably, this is strange, I never played a regular season for him, but he drafted me in 1980. His name was Chuck Knox. And even though I left Buffalo and went to New England, we remained friends. Unfortunately, he passed away recently, but he'll never be forgotten by this no-name kid out of LA who switched his position from quarterback to DB under his instruction. On the Patriots, actually the most influential coach I had on the Patriots is actually still there. His name is Dante Scarnecchia. And great coach, great person, great man. So I hope that answers your question, Mandy. And keep writing. And if you have any more questions. Hey, again, if you're interested in some of the work that we do in terms of diversity and inclusion workshops or leadership training, sexual harassment training, that type of thing, hey, email me. You'll see the email address and my contact information at the end of this video. Hey, take care. I'll see you next week. God bless you. Thanks for joining us. It's about time.